Hello everyone, my name is Richard Conley. I'm the senior, I just had to read my own title. I'm the senior principal solutions engineer at Reco. And we are a technology that specializes in SaaS security posture management and AI governance and discovery.
I'm Jonathan Vito, or as most folks refer to me as JB. I'm one of the senior practice directors for the cloud security practice at GuidePoint. Looking over all the major CSPs, so AWS, Azure, Google, a little bit of OCI. But also run the SaaS team as well. So been doing that in GuidePoint for about 10 years. Looking forward to having a great conversation today. With that said, definitely open for questions along the way. So.
Absolutely. Before I get started, can everyone hear me okay? All right, fantastic. I have this stigma. A lot of my technology background came early in my career from working in education. And when I was there's this concept of the sage on the stage, right, imparting this, knowledge that's like mystical and magical. I never bought into it. So I just hate standing behind podiums at this point. Thank you.
And I'm a preacher's kid, so I stay near the podium. and I wear suit coats, but I won't preach to you today, I promise. So yeah, I get started with a couple data points, right? Of course, I think when we look at the state of SaaS today, I kind of make this a little bit of a joke, right? I said, SaaS has become, it's the modern way to deliver business applications. No one is shipping CDs to you anymore, right? To install on the server in the server room, right? It is how businesses are doing business today. So obviously the amount of applications that we're seeing in the industry, right? Whether it's a small company or an enterprise, they just keep adding more and more and more. Right? Again, it's how business is done today. And then with that, of course, you have as those businesses are adopting more SaaS applications, shadow SaaS, has been a problem for a very long time, right? Especially today, the ability, we've heard this many times, throw in a credit card, the marketing department throws in a credit card to leverage technology or subscription for an application that they want to use. A lot of that starts to pop up, right? And I think in today's day, this is a problem I think that we're all aware of. There's some thoughts on that.
Absolutely, yeah. So, if we draw your attention to a couple of the metrics here on the board, this 300 plus number, in my own experience, typically is more aligned with small, medium enterprise. The second you start to step into large enterprise or Fortune anything, that number tends to skyrocket exponentially. And what we're really talking about here are SaaS applications that are in some way, shape, or form sanctioned in the environment, but because of how quickly and easily we can get configured and set up and signed into the services today, using things like social login or OAuth through other applications, we have sort of this unprecedented model of being able to chase best in breed. So you may have first started your AI journey using something like ChatGPT because it's the first one most people heard of, and you may now be working on something that does like vibe coding, something around like Cursor, or more specialized models, but you still have accounts in both services. So since it's so easy to expand and extend now, you find that, and then obviously the free software model, you find that there's just a ton more applications that fall under these categories. I know you mentioned credit cards. We have a really popular customer use case where a healthcare system actually uncovered that their organization had multiple instances of Snowflake. Anybody who's ever bought Snowflake knows that is a very expensive proposition. So they were able to identify that, consolidate everyone together after understanding that ecosystem, and that led to some exponential savings. Not a common use case for my type of tech, but it's a really cool one to kind of bring up. The shadow SaaS story is even more interesting. This is when it's sort of the shadow IT story. It's a little bit older. It comes from when people are signing into services that are they're using the corporate credentials, but they're not applications or services that you all deem as sanctioned, right? So essentially they're signing in without authorization. And it's really important to keep track of that. What I find most intriguing is that in most of our customers, this makes up around about 47% of all discovered applications, meaning it's not a small amount. It's nearly half are applications that may be used without you completely being aware of that. So discovery is key. We're going to talk more about the supply chain thing on the other side, but just be aware that is a growing concern, of course.
So looking at, before we go into this, right, just out of curiosity, right, in 2025 today, right, I want to ask the question, I think we all kind of understand that SaaS has really become a that we're seeing all the time. So we look at some of those risks, third-party risks, or like the downstream, the upstream risk. We probably touched a little bit about what happened with Salesforce, or that story today. But from a third-party perspective, one of the things that we've been seeing is kind of the struggle to maybe accurately evaluate the risk of third-party applications, SaaS applications. As we work with a lot of customers, what we're seeing is third-party vendor teams are just throwing their typical questionnaire at them, right? Do you have a SOC 2 certification? Are you ISO 27001 certified? But they're not really, diving into, what the risk could be. Like, what data are we going to put in there? And a lot of times, what third-party vendor teams do is they'll stamp it. But now, when we look at the data points that we shared, 300 or thousands, in the example that Richard gave with enterprises, third-party vendor teams are really struggling to kind of maintain oversight on that year after year after year. And those teams aren't adding, 20, 30, 40 more people to their headcount often, right? They're just, a lot of times they're outsourcing those reviews. So one fun fact that I'll share, related but kind of unrelated, a little bit of, I'm sharing it because I was involved in it, so I do have some bias. But so the Cloud Security Alliance last week, about 2 weeks ago, released what's called the SaaS Security Capabilities Framework. And what it is, it's a bunch of folks came together, right? It was myself, another person who used to work here at GuidePoint, that went somewhere else now, and the guy who runs third-party vendor risk for MongoDB out in the UK. It kind of came from, his name's Boris, it kind of came from his thing, where he said, he runs third-party vendor risk. He was here at MongoDB. We have, to your point, thousands of applications. He was like, I'm drowning. He goes, what would be really helpful is if there was a standard out in the industry that SaaS applications can adhere to, maybe get certified on. But what it does is it looks at the security capability or the security functionality of those SaaS applications. Because you're going to find some applications have some functionality, other ones don't. But in order to create some consistency, this framework was released. So I'll probably highlight it a couple times here, but it was intended to really help third-party teams or risk teams kind of onboard applications, provide more oversight. Because now if you can get a badge, right? If you can get a badge from Cloud Security Alliance that says you need certain functionality that the business wants, it'll help streamline some of that stuff and hopefully bring some more visibility there. I'll let you handle applications.
Yeah, sure. I actually have one more note too there. Did everyone here attend the keynote earlier today? Yeah, so we made this, you kind of put the majority of this piece together here a couple weeks ago when we were talking about and planning out this session. And the three major risks that, there was a question that was asked, what keeps you up at night? And the three major risks that were highlighted were third-party risk, AI governance, and sales law drift. And that was kind of right there at the top of the key. And when I said that, I was like, we're talking about this like weeks ago, and it just happened to align. So when we're discussing something like third-party risk, obviously sales law drift comes into play as a third-party vendor that would have been in charge of those keys. So how they secure and how we analyze how they secure is super important, and it ties into what you were just talking about. Around trying to build out sort of a certification or a standard, because those of you who are familiar or maybe even were affected by the sales law breach, sales law is currently, they have a current ISO 27001, they have a current SOC 2 Type 2, and they actually extended into 27701. They also have CCPA and they're GDPR compliant. So if you rubber stamp that one, you're assuming based on those standards that they've done the due diligence on the back end to protect their GitHub from the token exfiltration, to protect their Salesforce, and to recognize this. But here we have a breach that lay dormant for over 6 months, where they essentially were able to aggregate data, download repositories, and do a lot of really sort of noisy things, create guest accounts, exfiltrate token data, navigate laterally into AWS, do work in AWS, to reach out and then tap into other people's customer environments, right? But we trust those standards. So I think it's time to sort of look at what we're doing and sort of modernize it. I fill out a lot of third-party vendor risk assessments as part of my job. Some of them have requirements that are so old. I used to cover those requirements when I crawled in closets and connected cables. Like, we're not doing any of that anymore. It's like they're asking me, what software is loaded on the box I'm shipping to. No one does that anymore, right? So it's very interesting to see that this highly regarded, highly certificated organization is exposed, which really says that pretty much all of us are open to it. Being diligent is going to be key. Application sprawl. So application sprawl, obviously a big topic, ties into third-party vendor risk, but when we're talking about app sprawl in specific, what I'm referring to is the ability for applications to connect to third-party applications downstream, or I guess fourth party, or fifth party, right? So essentially you have this OAuth story where everything sort of hyper expands very quickly, and gathering knowledge and understanding on what applications are being used by your applications becomes just as important as tracking which applications are being used by the people. So, ultimately these OAuth extensions can be used in the same way identities can, and not to beat a dead horse, but that's exactly what happened in Sales Off the Drift. Shiny Hunters as well, leveraging OAuth connections.
On the AI governance front, again, that was covered today in the CISO panel, which I think was great. I think Gary Brickhouse highlighted something really well. Sometimes we're using applications that themselves would add, we have a shiny new AI widget now, right? And you've inherited that now, right? It happens a lot, right? So again, I was gonna pepper in promoting this new framework from the CSA that came out. It's actually one of the things that we talked about that made its way to the framework is giving the SaaS consumer an ability to kind of enable disable some of these features, right? Because we're seeing this with even with AI. There's a lot of SaaS applications out there that all of a sudden you're in there and there's an agent there that you can work with. You can't turn it off, right? But you know that agent's going to work with your data. Again, you can't turn it off. It's part of the application. So kind of what we tried to do with the framework was to kind of promote a little bit more control for the SaaS consumer. And some organizations may say, hey, this is great. This is what we want. Some others may say, look, we're not ready for that yet. So what we're trying to encourage is SaaS vendors to actually make that features like that, not just AI, but just almost any type of feature, kind of more configurable by the SaaS consumer, right? Let you as a business owner make a decision on whether or not you want to use that functionality or not. So, and it's not all functionality, more things that are kind of higher risk.
Yeah, just some small notes on the AI governance piece. Understanding, so AI governance is crossing over, essentially a governance that's expanding already existing models. So many of the AI applications are SaaS applications. So if you can monitor them from a high level, it's really important, right? You can understand the traffic that's going to and fro. You can maybe even layer in some of this next-gen prompt analysis technology. It's really cool, right? But AI governance tends to mean different things for different people. Oftentimes we think about standalone AI. We talk about Cursor, and we talk about Anthropic, or Claude, and all of those different providers. But what you're talking about is a little bit more insidious. It's this concept of embedded AI that's being layered into the technologies that you use today, right? One of my favorite demo use cases is built around the concept of embedded AI within Zoom. So they turned the feature on, it automatically started creating summaries of all of your Zoom calls, and most people didn't have in their contractual language anything about whether or not they could trade on your data. So they started training on your data, naturally, right? Now Zoom, to their credit, gave us some controls, and we were able to kind of toggle it on or off, but it was still released and utilized by many organizations before they realized they could toggle it. So just kind of something to think about as AI starts to work its way into other existing applications as well.
And just an example on that, I won't mention the vendor, but there's like a SaaS-based file storage system, right? That I know somebody was using. Everything's in there. Client deliverables, proposals, financial data, everything's in there. All of a sudden, it's what they had. There was a click summary, right? So that's interesting, right? No one, that organization didn't authorize that capability in there. So now they have to scramble on permission management, right? Because it's now, fairly decent sized organization, right? And what their concern was, can I actually start asking this agent questions on payroll and maybe some other information? So,
yes. Yes, you can.
So again, SaaS applications, of course, they from a shared responsibility model, right? Of course, it's probably only the least amount of things, right, that you'd be responsible for. But the things that you are responsible for, I feel like you're more responsible for, right? Like data, obviously identity and data, right? So with SaaS, it's pretty much you're throwing your data in there one way or shape or form, or you're throwing your identity. And that's creating, we talked a little bit about that today, even again back to the AI topic, right? Where I forgot who it was, the CISO panel that said, I think a guy from MoneyGram, he's like, who likes managing identities, I think is what he said, right? He's like, now you have to manage like agent identities. So, SaaS presents another big problem, and I'm curious on your thoughts there, Richard.
Yeah, so identity governance, identity and access management, this is sort of a big piece of the SaaS story. I think it's kind of a no-brainer that that's the one commonality between all the applications, right? The people who are using them. So understanding the access and the roles across all these different disparate technologies is kind of, the responsibility falls on the security team, right? The team who's doing the assessment of the solutions that are being used. So if we just for a moment ignore the shadow SaaS that is totally going on in the environment, people are already using, you can't control, and just look at the things you can. Understanding the applications, understanding the users, the local users associated with that, the roles, which of course, because we're cybersecurity vendors, I am one, I am guilty of this. We all have different names for different roles, and what an admin can do here, they can't do there. What an admin reader can do here is extended there. So commonality across the roles and having something that can scan and do analysis is incredibly helpful. But yes, according to that shared security model, a lot of this falls on the people, right? And if you look at the big breaches last year, you look at Santander, you look at some of those other ones that popped up over time toward the end of the year, they were all tied to a combination of misconfiguration, so inconsistent controls, of identity objects. So someone toppled off SSO for an account, or MFA for an account, so someone signed in, they used the account, and then they were able to breach and exfiltrate or cause disruption. So from this model, the identity access managed story continues to expand, and it gets more complex with the SaaS story.
We actually touched on something right there. We can talk about like configuration drift, which I think is our next slide as well. But we talked about, like we said, right, it impacts identity, right? But I mean, it's right there too, data exposure as well, right? Somebody, and again, I'm going to highlight this control framework that came up from CSA again, right? That's one of the things that we looked at was actually, in order to kind of get the certification or whatever from the Cloud Security Alliance, is to have some sort of configuration or version control or configuration management within the platform. Because to your point, right, somebody goes and misconfigures or changes the configuration, right, of an identity or a data configuration. A lot of these SaaS applications don't give you the history of that, right? Who made that? And some SaaS applications say, oh yeah, we have an audit trail, but the way they present it is really basic, right? It's like, it might say, Richard made this change, but that's it. Richard changed, this folder, configuration or whatever, but there's no details in it. So, I think, and actually, I'm gonna go to that next slide right away, because that's kind of maybe the point there, right? Is that you have to be cognizant of that in the current state of SaaS today, right? Like in SaaS, right? You have Salesforce, you have Workday, you have NetSuite, right? You got all these like enterprise level applications, but then you also have all these other ones that your HR might be using, right? Or payroll might be using that are, maybe they only have 20 or 30 different capabilities, but it's still somehow, mission critical to that organization. So configuration drift becomes a big piece, a big part of the problem because, as security leaders, I don't think there's visibility into maintaining what configuration state is. I mean, at best, in some cases, you're taking screenshots, right, of configuration. But if there was a mechanism to actually pull that information, let's say through an API, and say, current state, what's configuration today, current state, what's configuration, whatever, tomorrow. I think that brings some additional visibility into control, right, into how people are managing SaaS applications. But anyway, you mentioned configuration drift, and I think that opens up the door for a lot of situations.
It does, yeah. So I think everybody kind of gets the idea of config drift, right? Like over time, things change. You have to make necessary adjustments to your model. So you kind of make things move around in order to meet the business needs. Oftentimes, the business needs clashing directly with the security best practices, and you just kind of having to accept the risk. I think that's a really important point about this concept, right? Most people, during initial setup, set things up according to best practice. They intend on doing things right. They deploy the solution, they follow the Salesforce best practice guide, and lock sessions to IPs, do all the stuff you're supposed to do. Then the add-ons come out, then the changes occur, and I think the key for me about this, and this is just from a practitioner perspective, when I used to do this as a practitioner at the University of Chicago, and I did cybersecurity at ITGRC work there, a couple other places. I'm based out of Chicago. Go Bears. But I would say the one thing that's really intentional is being intentional about the changes, right? So, and owning the changes, and understanding that side of it. Because what happens is a lot of times the config drift gets away from us. And we're not making proactive decisions or proactive risk assessments based on this detail. So what we're essentially doing is we're just kind of falling behind the configuration drift wave. And a perfect example of this, anyone, I'm sure if there's people in the room who've ever worked with Microsoft and Exchange, I was responsible at a different university for converting from on-prem to cloud. When you move from on-prem to cloud, you have to get an account. An account that probably exists in many of your environments today, for some strange reason still hanging out there. It's either called DirSync or Azure Sync. Those are the two names that Microsoft recommends you use for it. This DirSync account is a global administrator that cannot be tied, at least at the time, cannot be tied to MFA, and had essentially the job of synchronizing the two databases, the on-prem accounts with the cloud accounts. So a lot of older organizations I still see it in POVs today. It's a horrible account. It's terrifying, right? It's a global administrator that can just be compromised at any time. And it always made me very nervous to have that account there, but with a solution that's monitoring for configuration drift, you have the ability to take ownership of it. I'm accepting this risk and I'll reassess it in a month. I'm accepting this risk and I'll reassess it in 3 months when Jim's project is over and we can turn IP address whitelisting back on. But it's the concept of allowing it and then it just falls into the wayside as you move from project to project that allows for the drift to become a gap. And when it's a gap, it's a problem. Much harder to clean up than it is to proactively.
I like what you said at the end there. I had some thoughts there. You said it's much harder to clean up, right? So, we think of, like, let's say endpoints, right? You may have 50,000 endpoints in your organization, right? Let's say they're all Windows, they're all Mac. There's a CI's benchmark, right? For MacBook configurations, there's a CI's benchmark for Windows computer configuration, best practice guide, right? Let's say you have 50 firewalls. There's a CI's benchmark for that. There's a best practice guide for that. And let's say you have to clean up, 50 of those firewalls or fix your endpoints. It's manageable, but it's at scale, but it's manageable, right? SaaS. All the SaaS applications are different, right? So when we said harder to clean up, that's what triggered that, right? Because there is no CI's benchmark for the countless SaaS applications that your organization might be using, right? I think there is one for Salesforce. I think there is one for kind of maybe the more common, enterprise level applications. But when you start digging deep and gather an inventory of all the SaaS applications that your organization is using, there is no CI's benchmark, right? How do you hold, somewhat accountable to a best practice configuration when it hasn't been identified? And a lot of these SaaS applications, a lot of the vendors, they themselves don't even publish what security best practices are for managing their own SaaS applications. So these are a lot of the gaps that I think we're seeing when we talk to customers, right? We're in the CSA framework thing again, right? That's one of the things that we actually put into the framework was publish in every SaaS application. If you want to get this badge certification, you should be publishing best practices for your platform, right? Which is going to be subjective as well, right? We had a big debate about that, right? I think somebody said someone's just going to use AI and publish a page. Like, here's best practices. They're probably going to do that, but at least it's better than what's happening now. But imagine going to have to clean up thousands of SaaS applications, or even just doing an assessment or review. You do need some sort of technology to come in, be able to plug into a lot of these applications and do some of that discovery for you, right? I think it's kind of what you were alluding to with just the visibility, and then harder to clean up. It's a mess. Say that. So the business impact. So at the end of the day, one of the things I've, of course, consulting for many years, the thing you learn is we go in and configure stuff, right? But ultimately, how does this impact the business? So when you look at compliance complexity, I've done a lot of work with early stage startups, and what I helped them with is as they were trying to onboard, their Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, whoever, right? Big organizations. They had to make a lot of adjustments to basically help that organization show compliance in the use of their own platform. A lot of vendors aren't doing that today. A lot of SaaS vendors aren't doing that today. So you have third-party vendor risk teams that are putting exception in after exception in after exception in because you're getting pressure from the business, right? And we all know what that turns into. Swiss cheese, right? Is I think a term a lot of people use. So, but again, so it becomes complex, especially now as data security starts to get a little bit more. I want to use the word aggressive, but that's not the right word. But data security starts to get a little bit more stronger, I guess. That creates a pretty big complexity there. And the operational disruption piece, when you look at a security event, there's always what's the immediate impact, right? A lot of times we also look at what is the operational disruption to the business. So when we're doing assessments with organizations, we classify applications not just from a data security perspective, but a business impact perspective. So if this application goes down, what stops? Like how does this impact your business? What happens, right? Is it payroll? That's always an easy one, right? And maybe there's other things there that impact your business. So.
Yeah, this is a really this one here is close to home. As I stated earlier, I did some IT GRC work, and understanding compliance through the lens of SaaS is frankly a nightmare. If you are a NIST 800 aligned shop and you're trying to understand what control 1.1.3.4 has to do with Asana, it's incredibly challenging, right? So understanding how to sort of map these out or using solutions that can assist in this process is key, because it's hard to align the controls on standards or on solutions that don't have clear-cut standards. It's really easy to take the CIS benchmarks as you highlight from all of those solutions and tie them in. Mind you, we see on POV often CIS benchmarks for GitHub, we have CIS benchmarks for Salesforce and for Snowflake, and when we activate them, most people fall under 60% of even those published standards. So when you take those into consideration and you think, okay, well, how does this work for Asana? And what does Asana's boards have to do with PII potentially? Well, people use Asana boards to organize their efforts, right? So if I'm a vendor and I'm using Asana to organize my customers, there's a customer list, right? And we need something to help map those standards together. And this is kind of, I think, the work that you're referring to around all the vendors, all the SaaS vendors to assist the time, try and bring this together by standard framework.
Absolutely. So the strategic approach. So one of the things I know we've been talking about with customers about, and it's interesting, they say there's nothing new under the sun. So I always enjoy when I end up talking to a prospective client, and they themselves already came to the conclusion that they need a SaaS security program, right? And there are others that are like, there's a SaaS security program. Why do I need a SaaS security program? Or I already have the third-party vendor risk that deals with this. The way I look at it is, right, I kind of see GRC at the top, right? And the GRC, obviously, gets split up into its own individual. But over time, right, for those of us that have been in the industry for a long time, we saw the advent of an application security program, a vulnerability management program, a data governance program. Right now, people are putting together AI security programs. So one of the things that we've been advocating, and again, we're seeing clients come to the same realization as well, is that they need a SaaS security program, but one that's a little different than just third-party vendor risk. And it's more a combination of IT security and third-party vendor risk. It kind of brings everything together, and it's really bringing people to the right room, or bringing the right people to the table. The other concept there is like centers of excellence, right? That's another thing that's kind of been, morphing up over the last 6 or 7 years. But I think when you look at it that way, especially when it comes to SaaS, I really do think that forming a SaaS security program really does have a clearly visible business impact. Because what happens today is, a particular group in your organization may want to onboard a SaaS application. Well, now they have to go run that through, that's a new supplier. So now they have to go run that through third-party vendor risk. That may get stalled, right? While the business is really legitimately trying to do something with it. And this isn't like, hey, we need to move to the cloud, so you have to prove, us use AWS. This is, hey, here's a tool, right, or a process. It's something like even Asana, right? This is a process that's going to be a part of our process improvement. That's going to help us do whatever. But now that's stalled, right? So when you put a SaaS security program together, again, you're able to onboard these applications maybe a little bit more efficiently. now they're kind of unblocking things within the business. And we're seeing that kind of come up right away. Or we're seeing that surface within our clients as well.
Absolutely. One thing I like to call out about SaaS security, SaaS in general, right? I feel like I like to view SaaS as democracy, like real, actual democracy, right? People are going in and they are voting on what they like to use, what they think is going to help them achieve their jobs better. I very rarely bump into a super malicious threat actor in a dark hoodie who's like hacking away at the inside of the network, right? What we usually bump into are people who are trying to do their jobs more efficiently, and they think that they're doing things the right way, right? We're capturing social logins through their work accounts or sign-ins for shadow services through their corporate emails. I mean, the reason they do that is because they want to use this for work function, and they're making that very clear, right? So application discovery is almost like a really clean way to count up the votes. And you get a look at it and you say, okay, so how can I enable the use of AI in our organization? Not how can I block it, right? Because they're gonna use it. And if you block it, they'll just take it, copy it, and paste it into their personal computer and use it there. And they'll bring those artifacts back to the work computer, and that's far more insecure. So if you were to take an objective view, where are top 5 SaaS apps that are coming? I'll answer for Reco. Reco, one of the top 5 AI applications at Reco is Cursor. Cursor is awesome. It allows for you to do super crazy coding. It allows for me to build a web application with a prompt instead of code. And I can code, but I'm lazy, so I want to use Cursor instead. So it's a really neat tool that enables the team to grow and develop at a really high pace. So I have 2 options, right? We have around 96 users of Cursor. I can say, we're gonna block Cursor at the firewalls, we're gonna cut it off at the the internal Zscalers and everything, where everything's flown over, and we're gonna keep people from, we're gonna advise them by policy to not use it ever again, because it's AI and we don't want our IP out there, right? Or I could buy an enterprise version of it. I can onboard it into an SSPM tool. I can monitor it from a security perspective. Most of these solutions will allow for you to do some semblance of prompt analysis as well, things like Microsoft Copilot and so on. So I'm going to onboard it and I'm going to use that, right? In order to act as a business enabler. I am now giving them a solution that we have control over, that we can see the security of, that we can validate, that we can trust the vendor on, we can do the work, as opposed to trying to force something. I see that a lot too. Well, we got an E5, so we're gonna make everyone use Copilot. And then you go ask the guy, he's like, I'm not using Copilot. Copilot sucks. I want to use Cursor. It's purpose built for this purpose. So when you have the votes and you're counting them up using your app discovery, it makes it very easy to take control over not only AI but all the other applications that are out there.
Something else that I wanted to touch. Just got the 5-minute mark, so I don't know if we'll get to that slide, but I want to hit it. You said something. So back to the SaaS security program, right? I look at like people, process, and technology, right? To me, that's how I try to approach a lot of things. So I'm and it's really I'm gonna touch on continuous visibility since you kind of started talking about Reco,
Yeah.
really what you guys do, right? So I'm a builder, right? Like I got a practice director for a GuidePoint for cloud, but at the end of the day, like I love to just catch me on the weekend. I got pictures. I'm doing all kinds of stuff, right? Milwaukee M18, way to go, right? But when it comes to SaaS, like let me backtrack real quick. So in the past, in my own career, there's a lot of technologies out there. But at the end of the day, I'm the market. I'm like, I'm gonna build my own tool, right? I have a lot of fun doing it. But when it comes to SaaS, I think the landscape is so broad that like even for me myself, I'm like, yeah, I can't build anything to maintain all this discovery and look at things and the way you guys start to parse information and all that. So this is like the first time probably in my entire career where I'm like, yeah, people, process, and technology, but you gotta go buy an SSPM, right? Like you gotta start with that. Even like with the advent of cloud for CSPM, I'm like, pretty simple. Like I can make an API call to AWS, I can pull everything down, run it through something I wrote. But I mean, the business logic that I think that an SSPM brings, I think is probably one of the first decisions that I would make. If I was responsible for hundreds of SaaS applications, you have to have that visibility, but you need that continuous visibility, right? Just when we think about some of the things we said, right? There's configuration changes that are happening, right? New identities that are being created. You need something to get that information in front of you. So
That's all we do. I mean, it's the benefit of being at a vendor. All I work on every single day is SaaS security and Reco. That's it. So I'm going to know a lot about it because it's the only thing that I do. When I was a practitioner, I ran firewalls, I ran SIMs, I looked through IT governance platforms, I ran all sorts of stuff, right? And you guys are busy, right? But me, I got all day to sit around and play in SaaS security. So we're gonna have a really detailed solution. Same way Wiz would do with cloud, right? That's all they do. So naturally, if the purpose built forward, we're gonna be pretty good at it.
So we touched on some of these topics here, but obviously the emerging AI security challenges. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add. We've covered pretty much.
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a bit. Just, it's important to kind of take control, build up some understanding, do some general discovery. Once you have that, the rest of the pieces will start to fall into place around governance and other components. There are ways to assist leading up to using the solution. The only solution in the world for this problem isn't going to just be Reco, right? I'd like to say that because I'm wearing my shirt. But the reality is that, there's a lot of things you can do soft to try and build up programs so that you're even prepared for technology like this. Because you can turn it on today and I can give you a lot of findings. And really what we're going to spend the majority of our time doing is not setting up the tech. It's going to be talking through how you're going to respond to it, how you can build out governance programs internally. If you've already done some of that groundwork, it's a lot easier to run and execute.
Cool. So there's a lot in there too. Alright, so any questions? Maybe open it up for that. So
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Any questions about anything we covered or just anything in general? Happy to walk through.
I'm from Wisconsin, Packers fan. Talking about that.
What else?
He's from Chicago, so I'm a shareholder, so.
You and everybody.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thank you, and again, hopefully, like I said, there's a lot going on in our industry today. Hopefully, we set some